I should have known better than to glance over, but curiosity has a cruel way of sneaking up when your guard is down. And there he was, Derek Cole, my ex-husband, sitting smugly across the crowded auditorium like he owned the place. That familiar smirk that once had the power to make me melt now only twisted my stomach into knots. Beside him, his perfectly poised new wife, Whitney, sat like some department store mannequin, not a hair out of place, her expression blank but somehow still condescending. And just as Emily rose from her seat to make her way toward the stage, that moment, already fragile, cracked wide open. Derek leaned in close to Whitney, his voice pitched low but not nearly low enough. "She's just like her mom," he sneered, lips curling into that patronizing half-smile. "Always the runner-up, never the winner." The words landed in my ears like shards of glass, each syllable heavy with scorn, soaked in the same venom he'd once reserved for me. Before I could process it, Whitney let out this syrupy little laugh, soft and fake, the kind that made your skin crawl. "Good thing she got your looks, though," she whispered back, her voice like a dagger dipped in sugar. I sat frozen, breath stuck somewhere between my chest and throat. For a moment, the entire world seemed to tilt, as if the air itself thickened, pressing down on me until my hands, once resting calmly on my lap, clenched into tight, shaking fists. The heat flushed up my neck, burning my cheeks as my gaze darted desperately toward Emily. She was already halfway to the stage, but her steps slowed, faltered ever so slightly. She must have heard them. How could she know? The confident spark she'd worn so proudly just seconds ago, the same one we rehearsed together in her bedroom mirror last night, dimmed right in front of me. Her posture slumped, her chin dipped, and her lips pressed into a thin, fragile line that trembled at the corners. My heart shattered. How dare they? How dare Derek and Whitney, on a night that was supposed to be about Emily, about everything she had fought for, everything we had survived. I turned my glare toward Derek, only to see him already absorbed in his phone, scrolling with an indifference that made me want to scream. Whitney leaned into him, whispering something I couldn't make out, her eyes sparkling with a cruel kind of amusement that made my stomach churn. And what hurt the most? That after all these years, after the divorce, after clawing my way back from the ashes he left me in, his words still had the power to slice through me like a blade. Why? Was it because, deep down, I still wrestled with the ghosts of his contempt, still feared maybe he was right, that I was nothing special, that I was the woman who always came in second place? I swallowed hard, forcing myself to focus on Emily again. She was at the podium now, standing small against the glaring spotlight, clutching a slim envelope in trembling hands. She blinked quickly, as if trying to force back tears before they spilled over. God, I knew that look. It was the same one I wore the day Derek walked out of our lives without looking back. My chest tightened until it physically hurt. Every maternal instinct screamed for me to leap from my chair, to storm across the gym floor, to demand he apologize, to defend my daughter like I always had. But something, maybe stubborn pride, or maybe the voice of my own mother in the back of my head, whispered, "Not yet. Let her own this moment." But was it already ruined? Could we salvage it from the wreckage Derek had thrown at her feet? The gym was packed, the air electric with applause and the snapping of phone cameras. But to me, it felt like we were trapped in a snow globe. Everything muffled, distorted, suffocating. And then Emily's voice cut through the stillness, soft, shaky, but unmistakably clear. "This isn't the real award," she said, her voice carrying just enough to quiet the scattered applause. "That comes later tonight." A hush fell over the room. Confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. I felt my breath catch painfully in my throat. My mother, Maggie, leaned toward me, her brow furrowed in confusion. "What's she talking about?" she whispered urgently. I don't know," I stammered, wishing I had an answer. On my other side, Ethan tugged at my sleeve, his wide teenage eyes brimming with worry. "Is Emily okay, Mom?" he asked in a trembling voice. I nodded instinctively, though I wasn't sure I believed it myself. My hands had gone numb, and the pounding in my ears drowned out everything else. Something was unfolding, something Emily hadn't told me about, and I could feel it building like a storm cloud, heavy and waiting to burst. As she stepped back from the podium and returned to her seat, her expression unreadable, the auditorium slipped into an uneasy stillness. Derek leaned back in his chair, smugness etched on his face. Whitney leaned into him again, whispering something venomous. I couldn't quite catch, but I didn't need to. I thought the damage was done. I thought Emily had been broken. But I was wrong, because what happened next? None of us were ready for it. Not even me. And maybe that's the thing about moments like these. They sneak up when you least expect them, shaking the ground beneath your feet, rewriting the script you thought you were following. It's the reason I tell these stories here, hoping they find the people who need them most. If you've ever been blindsided by life's plot twists, or found yourself standing in the middle of your own story, wondering what comes next, I hope you'll stay with me. Hit like, maybe subscribe if you haven't yet, so you'll never miss the next chapter we uncover together. The evening had begun with all the promise of a dream, carefully stitched together after years of fraying at the seams. The gymnasium at Maplewood High shimmered under a canopy of soft string lights, their delicate arcs suspended from the rafters like stars caught in a man-made sky. The hum of old overhead fans stirred the edges of blue and gold banners plastered to the cinder block walls, giving the illusion they were alive, fluttering with the restless breath of anticipation that lingered in the space. Parents drifted about in their neatly pressed shirts and polished heels, chattering in low, hopeful tones, capturing snapshots of their children's moments that would later gather digital dust in overflowing camera rolls. I had chosen Emily's dress weeks in advance, a deep emerald satin that pooled around her in rich folds, its hue reflecting the subtle flecks of green in her hazel eyes. Eyes that tonight I thought would hold the quiet certainty of a young woman standing fully in her own skin. She had never been one for flashy things, shunning sequins and frills in favor of simple, elegant lines, but tonight she had relented just enough to let me curl her thick brown hair into soft waves and add a whisper of mascara to frame those thoughtful eyes. "So I don't look 12, she had teased, the corners of her mouth lifting into that familiar knowing smile that said she was humoring me. 17 going on 30, my Emily. As we walked into the gym, the music of the string quartet tuning in the corner mingled with the clatter of folding chairs and the distant echo of laughter. And for a heartbeat, it was as if the struggles, the empty dinner plates, the whispered sobs behind closed doors, the endless sacrifices, and the sleepless nights we both endured, melted into the background, leaving only this one perfect, suspended moment. Maggie, my mother, had driven up from 3 towns over, wrapped in her Sunday best, a crisp navy pantsuit adorned with a modest gold pin that glinted beneath the gym lights like a badge of stoic resilience. She gripped her battered leather purse on her lap, as if inside were the universe's most sacred treasures. She patted my knee every few moments, her soft voice slipping through the noise to murmur, "She's going to do amazing tonight. You watch." And though I smiled at her, the tightness in my chest would not ease. To my other side sat Ethan, slouched low in his seat, fiddling endlessly with the strings of his hoodie, pretending he didn't care. But I caught the way his gaze clung to his sister like a shadow, unwilling to detach. He idolized her with a fierce, unspoken devotion, always had. We'd settled into our seats, 6 rows from the front, close enough to see every flicker of emotion on Emily's face, close enough to feel as if we were part of the unfolding magic. And for a few precious minutes, I let myself believe that tonight would unfold without shadows, that the ghosts of our past would respect the sanctity of this gym and stay buried. But then my gaze drifted, drawn like a moth to an unwelcome flame, and I saw them. Derek Cole and his porcelain-perfect wife, Whitney, seated across the aisle, their presence as jarring as spilled ink on a pristine page. I hadn't laid eyes on Derek in nearly a year, not since he had dropped by for Emily's birthday with a half-hearted card and a Starbucks gift card, as if that might patch the chasm he'd left behind. And damn it, he looked good! Crisp button-down stretched across his broad shoulders, his face clean-shaven, that same lazy slouch in his posture that once passed for charm when I was too young and too eager to know better. Whitney, all gloss and high heels absurdly too tall for a gym floor, was practically glowing under the lights, her laugh cutting through the air with the precision of a sharpened blade. They looked rehearsed, polished, as though auditioning for a reality show no one had asked for. Divorced dad tries too hard. I sucked in a ragged breath and forced myself to look away, to remind myself over and over that tonight wasn't about them, wasn't about me either. This was Emily's night, her stage, her triumph. Yet no matter how I lectured myself, the old knot twisted deep inside me, coiling like a snake, awakened by the proximity of the man who had made me feel small for so many years. It was always like this when Derek was near, a festering cocktail of shame, rage, and a creeping insecurity that I despised but couldn't entirely extinguish. He had moved on swiftly, built a shiny new life adorned with granite countertops and curated Instagram smiles, while I was still scraping by, renting a cramped two-bedroom apartment, serving cereal for dinner when money was tight, sacrificing so Emily could afford the test prep classes that might open the doors. I had once walked past empty-handed. Still, I pasted on a smile as Emily caught my eye from the front row, giving me a small, confident wave that stirred something bittersweet inside me. She looked ready, composed. If only I'd known how quickly that delicate facade would shatter. If only I'd recognized the moment the tide would turn against us, when a night wrapped in gold and applause would turn cold and sharp. But those moments, they never announced themselves. They slipped through the cracks like a bitter draft from a door you thought you had bolted shut. It happened swiftly, the kind of moment that unravels you before you even understand you're coming undone. Emily's name was called for her first award. Outstanding Academic Excellence, a title that, while prestigious, wasn't the crown jewel of the night. The applause rose, polite and measured, but I clapped as though it were the Pulitzer. She rose gracefully, smoothing the emerald folds of her dress, her hair cascading down her back in taut, deliberate waves. She looked serene, poised, embodying the quiet, unwavering strength I had seen time and again when she aced her AP chemistry exam, when she presented her paper on coral reef bleaching to a skeptical audience, when she opened her acceptance letter from Stanford and barely allowed a smile to crack her composure. That was Emily, grace under pressure. And then the world tilted. Derek leaned sideways, his voice low enough to remain beneath the hum of the room, but loud enough for anyone within a few feet to hear, and sneered to Whitney, "She's just like her mom, always second place." The words landed with the weight of an open-handed slap, burning through me with a raw, unrelenting sting that stole my breath. I froze, the blood roaring in my ears, my vision narrowing to a pinpoint focus on the two of them. Whitney's response was soft and cruel, a breathy chuckle that oozed malice disguised as sweetness. "Good thing she got her looks from you, though." My jaw clenched so tight I feared I might crack a molar. My fists curled on instinct, nails digging into my palms, though I barely registered the pain. The sounds of the auditorium dulled, the applause, the murmurs. Even the announcer's voice faded into insignificance beneath the crushing weight of those sentences. Emily was halfway to the stage now, but her stride shifted, her steps faltered, as though she'd stumbled into an invisible wall. Her head turned just slightly, the rigid line of her back stiffening, her shoulders bracing as though against an icy wind. She had heard them. I knew she had. And in that instant, something fragile and irreplaceable fractured within me. She was blinking too fast now, her lashes fluttering like fragile wings against the weight of the world, and the sight of it pierced me to the core, because I recognized it. I had worn that same expression, practiced that same desperate blink, the one that begged your tears to stay put when your heart was cracking wide open in public. My chest ached, a dull, heavy throb that stretched through my ribs like a warning siren. Every instinct in me screamed to leap from my seat, to rush the stage, to gather Emily into my arms and tell her it didn't matter. None of it mattered. That Derek and Whitney and their vicious little barbs were nothing, that they had no power over her, over us. I wanted to shout across the gymnasium, to throw the truth at Derek's smug face, to rip away his carefully curated detachment and force him to see the damage he'd done. How dare he try to ruin this for her, for me, for the tiny fortress of love and perseverance we had built brick by brick from the rubble he left behind. But my body betrayed me, every muscle locked in place, cemented by a suffocating cocktail of rage, heartbreak, and helplessness. I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe properly. And as I sat there, strangled by the weight of it all, I wondered bitterly, why now? Why tonight? Was his ego so brittle, so desperate for dominance, that he couldn't allow her this one singular moment of glory. I turned my burning gaze toward him and found him already back to scrolling his phone, his face an empty mask of boredom, as though this entire night, this stage, these awards, this daughter were just another tedious errand to check off his list. Whitney, beside him, was busy reapplying her lip gloss in a tiny gold compact, her reflection the only thing she seemed capable of worshipping, utterly unfazed by the sacred thing they had just chipped away at. On stage, Emily accepted the certificate with a stiff nod. There was no smile, no sparkle of triumph, no shared glance with me. She faced the mic, cleared her throat, and spoke in a voice that carried a brittle edge, soft but unwavering. "This isn't the real award," she announced, and the words hung awkwardly in the gymnasium's stale air. "That comes later tonight." The room faltered, an uneasy hush washed over the crowd, punctuated by a few awkward chuckles and exchanged glances. Even the principal tilted his head, puzzled, but Emily offered no further explanation. She stepped down from the podium, her chin lifted with an almost regal defiance, and returned to her seat, with a grace so poised it masked the tremor in her hands. Even from 6 rows back, I saw them shaking ever so slightly, the only betrayal of the storm churning beneath her skin. Maggie leaned toward me, her voice a hushed tremor of concern. "Is she okay?" she whispered. I don't know," I murmured, my voice cracking like old glass. Ethan glanced up at me, his boyish face tight with confusion and something bordering on fear. "She sounded mad," he said quietly. "Is she mad?" But I couldn't find the words. My mind spun in a frantic loop, chasing itself, trying to decipher what was happening. Something inside Emily had fractured under the weight of those words, but it hadn't shattered. It had shifted, recalibrated into something new, something I didn't yet recognize. I looked at Barrick, smug and self-satisfied, and it hit me like a gut punch. He had no idea what he had just ignited, and neither did I. Not yet. Back in her seat, Emily folded the certificate once, then twice. It wasn't a gesture of rebellion or disrespect. It was dismissal, as if that piece of paper held no meaning to her anymore, not when compared to the larger, heavier thing she carried within her. She sat rigid, her back straight, her gaze locked forward, unblinking now, like someone gripping onto something fragile and dangerous inside, something that might spill over if she moved even an inch. My mother's hand found mine, her touch steady, grounding. "Let her handle this," she murmured gently. "She's your daughter, after all." But what did that mean anymore? Did it mean Emily had inherited my capacity to swallow pain, to smile politely while my insides crumbled? Was that the legacy I had passed to her? Silence, endurance, the art of pretending it didn't hurt until the dark swelled and suffocated you behind closed doors. Yet, as I studied her profile, something told me this wasn't the same. There was a storm brewing behind her eyes, but it wasn't the quiet, invisible kind I carried. It was something stronger, more dangerous, a tempest waiting for the perfect moment to be unleashed. And then the air shifted. The principal stepped forward, manila envelope in hand, his smile warm, genuine, the kind you couldn't fake even if you tried. His voice crackled over the microphone, drawing the crowd back from the precipice of confusion. "And now, the highest honor of the night," he began, his tone tinged with reverence. "The award for the student with the highest cumulative GPA in the senior class. This award recognizes not only academic excellence, but leadership, character, and extraordinary resilience." He paused for effect, letting the weight of the moment settle over the room like a blanket. "This year's valedictorian is Emily Ward." The gym froze. The applause died before it began. Even the air seemed to hold its breath. I sat paralyzed, unable to clap, unable to move, staring at my daughter as though she were a stranger and a hero all at once. I expected shock, disbelief, maybe even tears, but there was none of that. Emily stood slowly, with a kind of deliberate grace that made her look almost statuesque, as though she had been waiting for this exact moment, rehearsing it in the depths of her soul. Each step she took toward the stage echoed louder, sharper, as though her very feet were carving new paths into the old gym floor. Her shoulders squared, her posture straightened into something resembling armor, and she ascended the steps like a queen entering a court that had once dismissed her. I saw Derek sit forward, his face creased with disbelief, and for the first time that night, Whitney's perfectly composed smile faltered, confusion stealing the edges of her practiced expression. Emily took the envelope from the principal without glancing at him, her gaze locked not on me, not on the crowd, but directly, unflinchingly, on her father. The silence in the room was thick and suffocating, the kind that drowns out even the faintest of sounds. You could hear the creak of a chair in the third row, a cough from somewhere in the back, but otherwise nothing. And then she spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, woven with steel and silk, cutting through the stillness like a blade wrapped in velvet. My whole life, she began. People have told me I'd always be second best. She paused, letting the words settle into every corner of the gym like a challenge. That I'd never quite measure up. That I wasn't enough. Not smart enough. Not pretty enough. Not important enough. The crowd remained frozen, hypnotized by the measured cadence of her words. Even the principal shifted uncomfortably at her side, but she continued, undeterred, her tone unwavering. But my mom, she said, and this time her voice softened just enough to tremble on the edges of something sacred, never told me I was better than anyone else. She told me to work, to listen, to keep going, even when the people who should have believed in me were the first to doubt me. From the corner of my eye, I saw Derek's smug composure dissolve, his face paling under the harsh fluorescent lights. And so tonight, she concluded, her voice not cracking once. I'm standing here, not because I was louder or because I sought revenge. I'm standing here because I earned it. Because my mom showed me how to rise quietly but completely. And then, finally, her gaze flicked to me, and in that split second I saw it, the pride, the love, the unshakable bond between a mother and daughter forged not in ease, but in struggle. I am valedictorian, she said softly, fiercely, and I am proud to be my mother's daughter. The room did not cheer. It couldn't. Not yet. There was a collective hush, a stunned, reverent silence that blanketed the auditorium like a fog, heavy and suffocating in its intensity. But something irrevocable had shifted in me, in Emily, in every soul packed into that gym. My daughter had just rewritten her story, reclaiming it from the hands of those who had tried to define her, and she had done it with a fire burning in her veins, with my name on her lips spoken not with apology, but with pride. The moment hung there, suspended in the stillness, like a held breath the entire room was afraid to release. Emily stood at the microphone, her grip firm, her chin lifted just a fraction, but enough to command a presence that eclipsed her years. It wasn't arrogance that radiated from her. No, it was something far rarer, more formidable, clarity. She had peeled back every mask, every filter, and stood raw, resolute, and unashamed before them all, including her father. And no one, not even Derek, dared to speak. I turned my gaze toward him, and for the first time, the carefully constructed facade he wore like armor had fractured. He sat stiffly, one hand digging into the fabric of his slacks, his jaw clenched so tightly I thought it might snap. His gaze wasn't on Emily anymore, it was turned inward, toward a space of reckoning he clearly hadn't prepared to enter. He had just witnessed a version of his daughter he never saw coming, the one who didn't need him, who never had. Beside him, Whitney was frozen, her lips parted slightly as though she might say something, yet no words emerged. For once, her face was stripped of that polished, performative smugness she wore like a second skin. She didn't blink. She didn't smile. She just stared at Emily, as if a teenager had detonated a truth bomb at the center of her perfectly curated world, and she couldn't quite fathom how it had happened. As for me, I sat rooted to my chair, every part of me trembling with something I could hardly name. A volatile mix of awe, pride, and something almost like grief, for the years I had doubted myself, for the nights I had wondered if I had given Emily enough to survive the wolves. My heart pounded so fiercely I could hear it in my ears, like war drums echoing in the hollowed-out caverns of my chest. My eyes burned, but I didn't blink. I couldn't. I wouldn't let a single second of her slip past me. Not tonight. And then, like the first crack of thunder after an unbearable stillness, the applause began. Hesitant at first, a few uncertain claps from the back, as though the crowd needed permission to exhale. But then it built, a ripple swelling into a tidal wave of cheers. applause, and whistles that shattered the silence and rolled through the gym like a cleansing flood. A standing ovation rose up, sudden and unstoppable, a roar that seemed to shake the rafters. I found myself on my feet, though I hadn't made the conscious decision to stand. My chair scraped backward, and only then did I realize I was crying, not the quiet, bitter tears of heartbreak, but the kind that cleanse, that wash away years of doubt, years of whispered guilt, the corrosive voice that had hissed, "You're not enough, you failed her." That voice, gone, obliterated. She was more than okay. She was magnificent. Maggie was clapping so hard her pin flew from her lapel, landing unnoticed on the floor. Ethan, face flushed crimson with excitement, climbed onto his seat, cupping his hands around his mouth as he whooped for his sister, his hero. The principal, looking somewhere between overwhelmed and reverent, offered Emily a handshake that seemed almost inadequate now, as though even he wasn't sure whether to congratulate her or offer her the keys to the school. But Emily didn't bask in the attention. She didn't preen for cameras or soak in the limelight. She stepped off the stage the same way she had walked on, quietly, deliberately, her head high, her back straight, every inch the girl who had never needed to shout to be heard. She walked straight to me. By the time she reached me, my composure had crumbled entirely. Tears streamed down my face, unstoppable now, my chest shaking with the force of them. And when she wrapped her arms around me, everything inside me cracked wide open. "Did I go too far?" she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. I shook my head fiercely, sobbing, gripping her as though I could anchor us both to this moment. "No, baby," I choked out. "You didn't go far enough." We held each other for what felt like forever, right there in the aisle, as the applause thundered around us, as the room buzzed with energy that could have powered the entire town. And then, as the noise softened, I sensed a shift nearby, a presence looming awkwardly close. I turned. Derek stood just a few feet away, his hands shoved deep into his pockets, his mouth opening like he wanted to speak, to claim some hollow part in a scene he no longer belonged to. His eyes, for the first time, looked at Emily not as a possession, not as a pawn, but as something he couldn't control anymore, as if he finally saw her for who she was. But before he could speak, Emily turned her head ever so slightly, not bothering to face him fully, and said, clear and steady, "Don't ruin this." "It wasn't cruel, it was just—" And he stopped. He closed his mouth, nodded once, and slumped back into his seat like a man deflated. Whitney leaned in to whisper something sharp in his ear, but he didn't respond. The fight had gone out of him. Emily took my hand, warm and steady, and together we walked back to our seats. Not like nothing had happened, but like everything had. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, I felt whole. The drive home was quiet, but not the heavy, suffocating kind of silence that filled the years between us and Derek. No, this was the soft, peaceful quiet that followed a storm, the kind where the air still hummed, charged with electricity, but the worst of it had passed. Emily sat in the passenger seat, the unopened envelope cradled in her lap, not for the paper inside, but for the weight of what it represented, a victory claimed, a story reclaimed. In the back seat, Ethan hummed off-key, bouncing his knees like the adrenaline of the night still pulsed in his veins. Maggie, who had driven separately, rolled down her window as she pulled out of the school lot, calling across to us with a grin, "Your mama raised a giant," and for the first time in too long, Emily laughed. Not the polite, measured chuckle she used at school events, but a real, full-bodied laugh, rich and unfiltered, the kind that made me feel like I could finally exhale. When we got home, she followed me into the kitchen, barefoot, still in her dress, the glamour of the night still clinging to her like moonlight. She leaned against the counter, saying nothing, just letting the quiet seep into the spaces between us. The house was steeped in the kind of stillness that only comes in the quiet aftermath of a storm. Emily lingered by the counter, her bare feet pressing into the cool linoleum, her emerald dress pooling softly around her ankles, wrinkled now from the weight of the night. She hadn't spoken since we walked in, and I hadn't pressed her. I knew better. Sometimes silence was the only language strong enough to hold what words would only bruise. Finally, after what felt like hours but was likely only minutes, she broke the stillness. Her voice was soft, unguarded, but heavy with something that scraped against my heart like sandpaper. I heard him, you know. Dad. I froze, hands tightening around the coffee mug I hadn't realized I was clutching. My first instinct, the mother in me, wanted to rush in with comfort, to drown her in reassurances, to bandage the wound before she even finished saying it hurt. But something deeper, a quieter, wiser voice inside me, told me to hold still, to give her space, to let her unspool the weight on her own terms. She didn't look at me when she continued. I heard everything, she said flatly, the exhaustion bleeding through her words. When he said I was like you, always second place. There was no fury in her tone, no cracked edges of teenage anger, just a bone-deep weariness. Her gaze finally met mine, and in her eyes I didn't see rage. I saw something far heavier, fatigue, tired of pretending it didn't sting, tired of pretending she didn't still need her father to see her, tired of pretending that she was entirely immune. It hurt, she whispered, the confession like a delicate bruise she held out in her hands. Not because I believe it. I don't. But because he does. He really believes I'm less. Because I'm like you. I nodded slowly, feeling the sting of old familiar wounds reopening in places I thought had long scarred over. I used to think that too, I admitted, the words trembling free before I could second guess them. She blinked, surprised, as though I had spoken an unspoken truth neither of us dared name before. I spent years, I continued, my voice unraveling like an old frayed thread, wondering if maybe he was right, that maybe I wasn't ambitious enough, not bold enough, not pretty or assertive enough, that if I had been more of anything, maybe he wouldn't have left. Maybe he would have respected me. Her face softened, the sharpness of her hurt dissolving into something tender, something deeply human. She stepped toward me, her breath catching. But he was wrong, she said, her voice no louder than a hush, but certain in a way that wrapped around my soul like a balm.
I know, I answered. And for the first time, I truly did. Now I know.
She took a slow, grounding breath, and her lips curled into a private, quiet smile, the kind that wasn't meant for audiences or approval, but for herself. That speech tonight, she said after a long pause, it wasn't really for him, you know. It was for me. I needed to say it out loud. I needed to hear it from me. My throat tightened, my words catching on the swell of emotions I couldn't hold back anymore. The kitchen hummed softly around us, the refrigerator's gentle drone mingling with the creaks of the old floor beneath our feet. The world outside our walls seemed to vanish, leaving only this sacred little moment between mother and daughter, suspended in the hush of understanding. At last, Emily peeled open the envelope she'd clutched all night like a talisman. Inside was the official letter confirming what the ceremony had already declared, that she was valedictorian. But that wasn't all. There, folded neatly behind the certificate, was an offer we hadn't even dared dream of. A full-ride scholarship to Stanford. My breath caught. She held the letter out to me, her hands steady now, her expression calm, serene. I want you to hold it, she said softly. I wouldn't have gotten this without you. I took it as though it were made of glass, but her next words struck deeper than any letter could. You showed me how to be strong without needing to be loud, she said, her voice thick with emotion. How to stay kind, even when people don't deserve it. How to stand up, not with fists, but with truth. Tears blurred my vision once more, but this time, I didn't fight them. I let them fall, let them cleanse, let them heal. Later I watched her drift into sleep on the couch, still in her dress, her head tilted gently to one side, as Ethan curled against her like he had when they were small, his head resting on her shoulder, safe in the glow of her strength. The envelope rested on the coffee table, the lamp casting a soft golden light over the embossed Stanford crest, as though illuminating a new chapter none of us had dared to write. And in that moment, I understood something I had spent a lifetime missing. You don't have to scream to change the story. Sometimes the loudest, most earth-shaking thing in the room is a girl holding her head high, and a mother who taught her how. And that was our story. For anyone who has ever felt small, who has ever been told they are not enough, who has watched someone else try to write their ending for them, I hope you know that you hold the pen, that strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it stands, steady and unshaken, tells the truth, and lets the silence do the rest. If our story touched you, if it stirred something in your chest, or reminded you of your own strength, I invite you to share it, to let someone else who needs to hear it find their way to these words. Drop a comment, tell your own story, or leave a word of encouragement for every parent, daughter, or soul who's been made to feel small. And if you'd like more stories like ours, raw, real, and unpolished, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for walking this path with us.